All right, this is Mark Skoda, and this is the Independent Musician. We're here today with Rob Zeas. Rob is actually a longtime artist, musician, podcaster, as well as, he's worked for Fortune 1000 industry titans. He's done a lot of work for entrepreneurs, helped business leaders, and really effectively, I think, tell people how you build a career. How do you partner? How do you ultimately make what you love actually your business? Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark.
So why don't we kick off? Why don't we talk a little bit about your background? Obviously, when we got introduced there, you've got a lot of kit in your office. You're obviously interested in music, but you do a lot more than the music business, right?
Yeah, I mean, it started like when I was in my early 20s, I had the vision of breaking a band. And so I did that for a few years and was working steadily towards that goal. We had an EP that was released with a partner out of Asia that had a nice big fat upfront check as part of that transaction. And so it so happened that the Lord called me to be a husband and a father. So I put aside my music, was living in my in-laws' townhome for about 4 months, started a corporate career for over 20 years, and brought in $250 million to two Fortune 100 companies, and then steadily circled my way back into music.
That's pretty wild. So you made some money doing your building your family and building your corporate career, and decided then to go ahead and do something you loved as well, right?
Exactly, exactly.
So, one of the things and the reason I wanted to have you on the show, obviously, is not only your music background, but one of the things that you obviously have been focusing on in your corporate career, it seemed to me, was the whole consultation and how to develop revenues and really how to build and leverage relationships as well as one's creativity. And we think about artists in today, even though we have streaming platforms galore and social media, the reality is it's a high touch business as well. You've got to build those relationships through your fans, through people that you know in the music industry as well. And then ultimately, how do you turn that into money or monetize that to make a living at it, right?
That's exactly it. And it was almost like with a corporate career, one looks typically very top down at opportunities. Like you see, like Spotify is a huge marketplace, for example, with tens of millions of catalog, or you see a platform like Tidal or YouTube. It could be any platform, and you go, all right, what's the real market opportunity that's addressable to me as an independent artist? However, the reality, when you shake through all the learning along the way, which we certainly have the learnings, you find that there's you got to demystify that whole top down view that corporate life gives you into the reality. And that tends to be all relationship based. So, who do you know in film? Who do you know in TV? Who do you know in radio? Who do you know that is going to even take an interest in your band to perform live at some of the key venues where you've got national talent coming through your marketplace, for example?
Now you've worked. There were two in your profile that interested me that you've worked with, which is Live Nation and Amazon Prime Video. So you've dealt with the guys that have basically the monopoly on all the shows in the world now. It seems. In fact, we just had Taylor Swift here for 3 days and almost got rained out last night, but she did perform here in Nashville. And of course, Amazon Prime is the whole video distribution channel. Tell me a little bit about that and what you did with them and what you learned about sort of those channels.
Quite honestly, Mark, and to your audience, I'll be humble even before our Lord here that's always with us. And I'll tell you, like, we didn't start there. And quite frankly, we'll always have some true, genuine logo association with Sonic Octane, which is the name of the band. And the fact of the matter is, it was a very steady climb, just doing the right things. It wasn't like we went shooting off letters to Live Nation, Sony, and others to participate. It was basically, I was leaving a corporate job and they were having a ton of reductions. It's unfortunate in the industry that I formerly served. It continues to this day, in fact. And so I stood up out of my chair when I found someone who I really cared deeply for, who worked very hard, was getting impacted by a layoff or reduction in force notice. And I went walking around the senior executive team of the company because every 2 weeks on average, I was engaging with them in projects anyhow. And as it turns out, lo and behold, God allowed us to find a land for that person. And he swings into my office one day to thank me. And he sees on my monitor, I've got all this video. that I'd been taking years to collect and shoot as an independent artist, moonlighting with my corporate job. So we had some videos from Bel Air shot at Tom Jones's mansion. We had other videos that were shot on top of Mandalay Bay, there, at the exclusive foundation room. And he goes, "Hey, Rob, you're kind of like a real band. Like, what are you doing with all this content?" And I'm telling him, like, well, we're kind of wanting to be a real band, but we don't really have the chutzpah to go out into, like, major, let's say major FM radio at this point. No one's calling us to
Right.
appear for interviews. And frankly, we hadn't even had a distribution agreement at that point. I was just collecting content. So the long story short, he goes, "Hey, I have a sister who runs a nationally syndicated television show out of New York. You got to meet her." And that teed up a meeting in New York at Penn Station that led to interviewing on her TV show as a guest for 7.1 million audience on ABC, NBC, the CW, Fox, all the major stations.
Right.
And that led to greater things, ultimately a cooperation with Live Nation and other partners to distribute our content.
So when you talk about your content per se, is it not only music, but it's also video and other work that you're doing? I know that you're a speaker. Tell me, I mean, what I'm trying to understand here is what was that content that you sort of began your career on?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if you start at the least common denominator, to me, because of the fact there are so many independent artists and you kind of lightly compete in that marketplace with a lot of people with huge talent, frankly, and a lot of automation, even a lot of technology behind their sound. The thing that was most important to me was content as a strategy for the first 3 years of Sonic Octane. So as Robbie Phoenixx goes, you had to kind of step into big shoes and learn how to be an independent producer. And
Right.
by that, I mean an independent film producer, as well as kind of like an independent audio producer. There's much more to that realm that I need to grow in. But at the end of the day, we were cutting our own audio here out of our own demo studio. So that's the first step, was just getting the content to a point it was edited enough and with enough people around that had talent to be able to bring it forward to market, that it would have a unique quality to it. And then the second phase was really just going after leveraging some of my corporate skill, and that specifically being laddering up to get distribution in place to be able to associate our brand, which was a baby brand at the time, into Live Nation, Sony, and others.
So when you look at this, obviously, what you've essentially done. I mean, you took early on a music career or music interest, right? Sort of step back into the corporate world, figured out that corporate, just like music, is about building relationships, building the differentiated message, whether that's in content or your own personal skills, and then coming back into music and leveraging those points and experience and knowledge base to actually now move more directly into music. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yep. It's kind of going back into the well after you've been out a while and had a lot of lessons in another industry, essentially. And, you mentioned earlier about my keynote speaking, and that's yet again another extension of me, right? I used to love to be up on stages playing and wailing on a guitar with 100-watt amps.
Right.
And guess what? I love to speak. I love to be out there in front of people to add value to their lives and their experiences in that corporate realm, because there are a lot of people out there that sit behind their desks. They're probably chained to constraints of budgets and timeframes and projects, and then all the expectations on their development over time. And you go, they probably want to be a little unchained. They probably want to see that there's not just some glass ceiling, that they're stuck in that role in a 3D environment for so long that at some point they feel like they're living in a fishbowl. And maybe there's more to life. And maybe there's part of the perspective I can bring to them is, yes, you can transition out of industry successfully. But by the way, while you're there and you're choosing to be where you are, maybe you want to leverage your creative advantage for your competitive advantage when you compete in the workplace and you compete with your peer group. Like any industry you're in, you've got competitors. So if you're an artist and you're on Spotify and you're on Instagram and you're on LinkedIn, etc., there are competitors out there sending out those messages. How are they scaling it? What's the content feed? What are the APIs? What is all that stuff behind it that makes you scale successfully?
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. Obviously, I've come out of the corporate world myself, and in fact, people say, "Well, why did you start a record label?" Well, bottom line is, the independent label we had signed with my son wasn't getting the job done, and I said, "Well, damn, I've written business plans like some people write short stories." So I wrote the business plan, shared it with Greg Upchurch, and vis-a-vis the idea of an independent label and technology based, however, because we put together a technology stack to serve the artist and be able to replicate that over and over again. And boom, there was Iron Gate Records. And then leveraging some work I did in the political environment and having done a radio show on terrestrial radio for both FM and AM and syndicated in about 15 different markets, I used that knowledge to put together an internet radio station. And of course, live talk in the past and speaking to people generally. Like yourself, I love speaking to groups. In particular, 4, 5,000, 10,000 people is fun. And, basically then putting together the podcast and essentially bringing guests like yourself on where people can begin to aspire perhaps to the things that these guests and these experts are doing. And frankly, just the average person. That's the other key point of this. It's not to have everybody who's been hitting it out of the ballpark, but also people who've just continued to work day by day, who are making enough money to live and live well generally, and ultimately to do what they love. And I think in this environment that we exist today, post-pandemic, we've seen a lot of changes in the workforce. We're seeing it continue to evolve. We're seeing everything from the challenges of work at home to sort of even the tech space now has matured yet again. I mean, I go back to the 1999, 2000 crash in tech. Now we're seeing something similar. You cannot grow forever in tech. And I think that ultimately people begin to realize that they have an opportunity to leverage those skills and potentially, if they're so inclined and frankly have the tenacity, and that's the key word here, the tenacity to go out and leverage those skills to do something that's entrepreneurial. And that is not for everybody, of course. It's not for the weak of heart or the faint of heart. It's really for somebody who really is passionate about what they do.
And being super candid, like my home was so used to that 23-year or so transition from, hey, I'm working at retail to finish my degree, to, hey, I've got a corporate job. I'm W-2. I've got a bonus. I've got stock incentives because I worked my way up because, well, I'm pretty damn secure. To, hey, I'm going to go out and take the giant nosedive because I believe in the mission and the message of Sonic Octane's music. And by that, you saw what happened at Mandalay Bay with the massive iHarvest Music Festival massacre being a blunt affront on the very soul of American music, murdering over 50 people.
Right.
And that was my nosedive. That was me going to my wife, who was and still is the center of my universe, and other than our good Lord. And I said, honey, I would love more than anything the opportunity to carry a message forward that would ably serve and ask the right questions as an artist. And because I'd been stacking all this other content, moonlighting in Beverly Hills at the time, in Bel Air, and she said, yeah, go for it. Like, you're kind of like a producer. Just go find some partnerships, find some people that care, that have a conscience, that actually are going to carry this message with you. And that's exactly what I went off to do. And I'll tell you what, at the end of the day, Mark, you can't have enough people on your bench as an independent artist that are partners, that are friends, because you can't scale your message more than typically tens of millions, regardless of the independent label that you work with. So it's all about those lateral relationships, not just that you found a home for some of your content.
Well, that's right. And, it's interesting because at the end of the day, I talk a lot about, streams, and I talk about the, sort of followership and all that. And really, it's, as you all understand, it's about engagement. It's how do you monetize those relationships? And I'm not talking about abusive relationships. I'm talking about how do you take those 1,000 super fans and talk to them and work with them and make yourself a living from them, because they'll buy your merchandise, they'll download some of your music, they'll show up at your shows and buy some tickets. And whether it's 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000, but it's certainly not going to be several millions. There are only one Taylor Swift's out there, right? The fact of the matter is the iconic bands of old are not happening today. On the other hand, we do have a lot of people who want to know and want to be engaged in sort of what I call the high touch environment, right? Why are 20 something year old kids still going out there and watching concerts from Kiss, an 80s band, guys who now are somewhere close to 80 years old. I was at a Kiss concert here in Nashville with my son right before pandemic hit, and I had to laugh because I saw these 20-year-old girls bopping and the TVs on them, right, the screen showing them off, and I'm saying, okay, these guys all look good because they got black wigs and white face paint. And I said, but they're still about 70 some years old. I said, what are you doing listening to my music? Right. It's sort of, it was rather an interesting experience. And so I think at the end of the day, as you point out, it's really how do you build those relationships, and how do you harvest those relationships to continue to build your career?
And as we were mentioning in the pre-conversation before this interview, like, it's also really about what value do you bring to that other party? Like, I didn't go to create the typical music video content. Like, I absolutely did not go the traditional route. Neither did anyone around me as a goal. So we didn't use like all the post-production magic and sizzle that like DaVinci gives you, or Avid, or fill in the blank, the platform, because there's a lot of post-production that can happen and make your videos look pretty damn cool.
Right.
It was really about finding scenes that were viscerally unique. So we went out and filmed literally on top of Mandalay Bay at the exclusive Foundation room. We found another example at an airport, because doesn't every band want to look freaking huge having a jet pull up that you want to board as though you're touring, right? And then we went to desert scenes, and we went to mansions in Bel Air, and all of a sudden our content kit looks entirely unique. And from a distribution standpoint, when you start dropping all the logos, like the celebrity names we've also collaborated with, it gets a little more fun on their end too, because there's brand association opportunities now, not just some content that might look kind of cool.
So let's talk about that, because obviously, you started off early on. I think it was you and a colleague, right, that were collaborating on sort of some studio music. Today's, it's actually a rock band, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, it started out as basically a songwriting duo with a third wheel who was the investor, and that was the original inception of the project, if you will. And we were fast clipping through at the time, because I was in a prolific writing mode, and we were writing about a song a week for about 10 weeks. And then we got to the point where the music was that good, we said, all right, let's take it to film. So we found this little studio in Burbank, California, that was owned by, well, the vocalist for Velvet Revolver, STP. His name is Scott Weiland. And we cut 2 videos there and did an interview and did a photo shoot and so on. And then we threw it over the fence. We went big, and we said, why don't we rent a mansion in Bel Air and continue building the video kit while we're in town? And sure enough, boy, that was a colossal effort, more than we knew getting into it. Yet we found ourselves with a PD, production coordinator. We found ourselves with a DP, director of photography, and so on. And the next thing you know, we've got some amazing content at Tom Jones's mansion, and even some stuff at the PRS studio where they used to record The Voice a lot. So we've got all this stuff, and we said, okay, now what do we do with it? And the learning and the tripping through the learning there, quite candidly, and that was about 8 years ago, was, okay, we've made all this amazing content. Now what do we do with it?
Right. No, that's exactly right. I was just, it's interesting that you point out that, obviously you had to get an investor as well. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it was kind of like one of those deals. We were very, very fortunate. Like, I moved to the state of Colorado, and I literally moved to replant my career in March of 2013. And I literally moved into this state with a guitar that's one of them that's sitting on my wall right now. I had no amplifier. I had an inflatable bed, and I adopted a dog. I was so freaking lonely away from my family. It was miserable. And over time, though, because of my corporate career, I was tossing in about, 10,000 here, 20,000 there, and getting back into music. So you're equipping with digital audio workstations, and you're equipping with mics and even amplifiers. Thank God I was able to get back into this. And the songwriting just started flowing, because I'm so thrilled that I'm revisiting my music from ages ago when I was a pre-father, a pre-corporate guy. And at the same time, I had a friend of mine who was a very close friend I've known since I was 8 years old. His name is Leon Klein. He lives in Ellicott City, Maryland. He has a family as well.
Oh, I know Ellicott City. Actually lived just outside of there. Actually lived in Baltimore for a while.
Well, that's the thing. Like my friend Leon's like, hey, bro, I'm a drummer. He used to play with me in bands in high school, right? And he's like, let's create some serious visual art here and fuse it together with Hollywood where we were filming and get into the best studio we can possibly find. So we get together with this vocalist that I was cutting music with, and our vocalist goes, hey man, I know a serious producer in town. You've got to meet him. He works with freaking Stone Temple Pilots. He's
Wow.
got and yeah, so we walk into the studio. We're in Burbank in this little shitty little place you'd never even know was a studio on the outside. It was all like low key, right? 116 West Elm Street in Burbank. And we go in there and it's like, dude, I'm not even kidding. It's Jason Bonham's drum set just on the drum riser to our right. Matt Sorum from Guns N' Roses drum set just to our left. And I'm like, holy shit, I'm in heaven, right? Not just some boring corporate sniff going, I'm in a square job, it's 3D, and I don't know what else I do from here, you know? And it was awesome. So that's what kicked this all off again to a point that we had Leon throwing in a few tens of thousands. I did the same. That's how all this content was created. And believe it or not, Mark, we're actively shopping to this very day to find the right distribution deal because it seems not a lot of people have cracked the egg of taking content like serious film reel like this
Right, right.
and bringing it to market. You've got to go through a mini major, it feels like. I don't know what the answer is there, but we're still shopping it.
Yeah, I think you're right. This is always the challenge, right? Is how do you get it into the market and direct to your fan base, right? I of course, as you described all this, you were an overnight sensation. It's obvious, right? I mean, it just took a couple of weeks, and then there you were.
That's the thing. Like it really, the songwriting was advancing at such a fast clip, and the technology around us, because of our corporate positions, we're able to evolve and learn and grow that we eventually ended up with all this content that was freaking awesome. And that led to, as I said before, like some filming on top of Mandalay Bay, because at that point we had credibility as producers and we understood kind of the lay of the land. You've got to get filming permits, you've got to get insurance
Sure.
coverage, all that kind of stuff.
Well, clearly, I mean, my point there, it's been a 20 some year journey to get to where you are today, and a lot of people wonder about how do you become a success in the business, right? And in your case, I mean, you stepped back, you did the corporate thing, and you came back to what you wanted to do, and you're learning more all the time. And I think I tell people this all the time. Look, at the end of the day, sometimes you have to take a diversion to learn what you don't know, build relationships you don't have, and then come back to what you want to do. And in so doing that, you begin to be identifying those success factors that will allow you to effectively monetize what you do, monetize the brand you build. You've talked a lot about your brand, and then ultimately figure out who's going to buy it and where. And there is investment required. I mean, the challenge today, I talk to artists who all say, well, we can't pay any money. Well, then how do you expect to succeed? I gave you the statistic on Spotify alone. You can't even pay to be on get sort of considered. And we don't, by the way, we don't pay to play. We don't pay for streams. We don't pay for playlists, but we do have legit playlisting companies. But when you realize that, as you rightly pointed out a moment ago, distribution is stacked against you, you have to figure out how to get past those major hurdles. What people don't understand is the majors like Sony and Universal and Warner own about 60+% of the major playlists, and they put their artists on those, not you.
Right.
And so you're already challenged in terms of the distribution lockup. Live Nation, which controls all the big venues, right? Ticketmaster, which controls all the major distribution of ticketing, which is owned by Live Nation. So you have to use this technology today to build the one-to-one or peer-to-peer relationships that ultimately allow you to succeed. And that is far more difficult, but potentially can be far less costly as well, because you don't have to give up sort of the baby with the bathwater.
That's exactly it. And for us, it was a limited engagement with Live Nation. It wasn't like we went out to them and said, hey, give us a tour bus, Sony's giving us a blanket 360-degree, which is like a multi-year loan, essentially a 360-degree deal that says over 90% of every dollar they give into the honeypot of your band, from the packaging to the artwork to the music recording to the distribution cost to the marketing to the even the freaking cellophane, is recoupable. It's a loan that's paid back.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that point up. Our model, so you know, I mean, we basically bring on the artists. They have to pay $150 a month subscription fee. Everything else is a la carte with a 20% markup. It's cost plus. So if you have a project you want to do, we provide all of the technology. We provide all of the sort of relationships. For the base cost, you get distribution, you get gigging, you get the radio network, you get obviously the branding, you get through Universal Music Group, et cetera, and a whole series of other functionality. You get your online store. We don't take any money from the artists. We don't take any money from their streaming other than what's cost direct to Universal. We don't take any money from their merchandise sales. It goes directly to them with a 30% margin. We don't take their publishing unless we get them a sync licensing deal where we take 15% of contract. My point of all this is that the artist owns everything. Now, for that, they have to do something, of course. They can't just sit there in the baby bird syndrome. You point out the 360 deals, which still happen today. And by the way, the 360 deals, I like to call them, they're 360 plus deals now. Why? Because in the old days, you used to be able to recoup all that money from album sales. Those days are gone. So now they have to recoup the money from your gigging, from your merchandising. Basically, they have their tentacles into everything you do. And unless you're Taylor Swift and you make $100 million for 3 nights at Nashville, you're not going to pay those bills back. And if you don't pay them back quickly enough, or you're not successful quickly enough, you get shelved, right? And unless you're really smart in your contract, you can't get out of that either. So, it's not that the business model, I think, to a large degree is broken for the artist who wants to sort of evolve. But on the other hand, the technology environment that we exist today, the independent nature of so many people is far, far better if you want to work hard, make a living, just like you'd have to work hard in the corporate environment. This is not simply show up and throw up and then suddenly you're paid a lot of money.
Correct. And that's the key. And this is why I think for Sonic Octane, we decided collectively to step back and go, all right, look, if we want to own our own IP, and if we want in the case of myself, a single investor that's putting in well over 90% of all of the expense, I'm going to demand more out of you as artists other than showing up with your sticks and your picks. Right. You've got to dig in and be willing. And this is kind of funny. We've got a lot of funny stories about some of this stuff where you go, all right, so another business we sprung up is, and this is so funny, it's the most non-technology solution to an age-old problem in this industry, which is, I took another nosedive that was very risky and scary, frankly. And even at my age that I was in my 40s, I still decided to do this. I went out and bought a tour bus.
Oh, geez.
Now, it wasn't just you go and buy a bus, okay? We spent months looking around and scoping out what do we want? Do we want like a Mercedes minivan? Do we want a Windstream, Airstream, excuse me? Do you want like maybe like a touring, convertible school bus? Like Eventually we found a Prevost, and it was in a backwood in Taylor, South Carolina. It was literally rotting to pieces. We buy her, and then we have to drive her all the way home. Well, I didn't know jack shit about, pardon the French, but I didn't know anything about driving a bus. I will assure you that. And here we are, it's a 40-footer, 40,000 pounds estimated gross weight. It's a 30-year-old model almost at the time. And this thing can hardly go up a hill. And I didn't know what I was doing. I'm just like, oh, man, it's going like 30 miles an hour up this hill. What's going on? Well, I finally pull the bus home, and a tech looks at the fuel filter and goes, bro. And he looked at me like almost like you're in a classroom, and you just basically took a giant, a number 2 on the floor in front of the whole class. And he goes, bro, by grace of God alone, you made it home because this fuel filter is gunked up with, green stuff, algae, just all the algae. And so this is the learning you trip through when you do things like this. And here's the upside of it. While we took the risk to do that and we put tens of thousands into this bus, now we're getting calls Mark, and we're very open to working with you and your artists, by the way, because this is an entirely separate business that I own and run. And we get calls from artists that want to rent the bus to tour because the rental companies charge you $1,000 to $1,500 a day minimum.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, I own this thing. I don't have to charge anywhere near that. So now we get tour calls, not just because of our band or our music, it's because they love our bus and they love the idea of being on a Prevost. It's a classic, true rolling piece of American history, has a whole backstory to it on top of that with a bunch of artists. And so that's how we also had a brand extension through simply making a decision to buy a bus rather than doing the hotel thing.
So, given obviously where you are today, and it's interesting, you've begun to figure out. First of all, you've had obviously some economic benefit because of all your corporate work, and a lot of artists simply don't have several thousand, much less tens of thousands of dollars. Where are you in terms of return on your investment?
So here's the cool thing. And this is something, again, that was serendipitous. It wasn't like my brain and my corporate life somehow magically sprung some genie out of a bottle. It was just we were doing some of the right things, and we had a lot of good people around us that helped, right? So, right. As I mentioned earlier, we went to New York and interviewed in that TV show that went to 7.1 million audience on syndicated TV. And as it turns out, we had a separate meeting because the show host co-producer is the former vice president of distribution and sales for RCA Records. His name is Lou Vaccarelli, by the way. And his TV show host, Donna Drake, tees up a meeting with an independent film producer. Her name is Candace Kane. And Candace Kane rolls into the room. She's clearly a maverick. You can just tell by her demeanor. Plus, she's New York. So, I mean, you don't mess with people in New York anyhow. And we're on the East Coast, and I'm a former East Coaster by some years ago. And you kind of smell the room out a little bit, and you realize, she's in there for some type of kill shot. I don't know what the angle is, but she's in. She wanted to basically take one of our songs and sync it into her mini series. Now, this mini series was running, and it was planned and slated to run on Amazon Prime Video. And she says, look, you're kind of like a step above a lot of bands that I work with, because you're not just a band that has the content and you have a demo studio, let's say.
Right.
You've got a brand and you've worked with Live Nation. So she decided to put us in front of a title track opportunity with that miniseries. There were a total of 5 episodes that her and her team had worked very diligently towards completing. And as it turns out, with all 5 episodes running over a period of 2 years, it streamed over 30 million total song plays of our songs.
Wow.
That led to a multiple. Like when you look on IMDb, you'll see that each episode, I should say total of 5 episodes, streamed over 15 million times. Yet because we were a title track, she gave us a derivative on the front end of each episode, which was an acoustic version of the song. And then another derivative work, which was the electric version, the demo version of the song on the back of every episode that was streamed. So while all the episodes streamed 15 million times, our music actually physically played 30 million times as verified by IMDb data. And that ultimately led to a multiple of earnings because each song stream on Amazon gives you a certain, while it's a very low multiple, you and I know,
right,
really adds up. And that adds up to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars, literally, in earnings to do it that way.
Remarkable. So, as they say, you've been successful without actually filling up stadiums.
Correct. And that's the thing. When I go and I look at the analog side of my other business, the tour bus business, I go, now this is cool because the bus business is a high fixed cost business, much like the IT world that I came from in corporate, by the way. Like, need $1 billion to get into that marketplace. Well, in the bus world and the entertainment world, you need probably tens, if not hundreds of thousands to get into that marketplace.
Right.
And here we are with the God's grace of resources to put a little bit in, because we're not independently wealthy or anything, don't get me wrong. And certainly our balance sheet and our life went way down going into music. I will tell no one a falsehood here on your show. But I will say, when you own that bus, a lot of good things can fall into place, literally. Like, artists will trip over themselves because they realize if they go to an independent company to rent, they're paying for the fuel, They're paying for the driver. They're paying for the scotch tape. They're paying for the rental fee. They're paying for everything on that bus to the tune of, as I mentioned earlier, about $1,500 a day. And just imagine how many tickets that equates to they have to, in some way, package and sell and market in these venues that they perform in.
Right, right.
They're spending $30,000 a month minimum with a bus, sometimes over 40,000. And how do they even possibly begin to break even and have their tour that they really love to have and want to have? And all artists want to tour. Make no mistake about it. If you're a real artist, you're bulletproof and you do want to tour.
Well, that's right. That's the fun part, right? Getting in front of those crowds. I mean, whether it's a public speaker, but more importantly, when you play music and you watch that crowd getting into what you're doing, it's remarkable, especially since if you write your own music, it's the first time many people have ever heard it. And that is a lot of fun.
That's exactly it. That's the ultimate objective. And for me, I was a lot more constrained in that. I was like, hey, look, if you want to tour, like we did the tour once, and I figured this out very quickly, by the way. You can want to tour to New York and maybe parts of Connecticut and come back down through whatever, Maryland, Pittsburgh, whatever
Right.
it is. You're spending upwards of $10,000 to $20,000 to hit the road, right?
Right.
It's fuel, it's fuel filters, it's oil changes, it's tires, it's all this stuff. So when your OpEx is such, you've got to have on the other side of your band equation a way to fund it. Like it's not going to be your t-shirt sales, even if you make your own with the unit costs the way they are. And even if you don't pay yourself for the time to produce, you're still making $5 to $10 a t-shirt. And do the math as to how many t-shirts you sell at $10 profit per for a $10,000 minimum bare bones tour expense.
Right. Right.
So you got to make it up in other ways. And that's where artists sometimes they fall over because they go, oh, God, that's a lot of thinking. That's a lot of math. And I go, yeah, but if you don't do the math, you're going to lose your asses on the road. You're not even going to get through Kansas. So.
Yeah, and I talk to people all the time and I say, look, you've got to be a business person. I said, music is a business. When you look at the Rolling Stones, I mean, one of the reasons they've made it for now almost 64 years is Mick Jagger is actually a business guy. He's got, I think, a master's degree in business, right? And he's been on top of it right from the very beginning. That's why you never heard the horror stories that guys like Billy Joel, where their managers took all the money, or guys like Chicago, who their manager made more than the band did, and yet here you are. And I think if you're not aware of the business elements of your craft, then you're obviously potentially leaking dollars or losing money generally. And it is not about having fun playing. Yes, that's important. But if you're going to do this as a serious professional, then you have to make money doing it.
This is why I think in a lot of the management circles in the industry that I found in what I'm calling the mid-market of the music and entertainment field, there's a lot of this kind of jocular humor, if you will. And I mean that respectfully, but the fact is a lot of artists, they just want it handed to them. Like if you're not willing to do the work on all fronts, not just the work as in, hey, I physically lifted a drum set, which by the way is a lot of work.
That's right. Believe me, when my son was younger, I was the roadie. Okay, I had to haul around everything, including the audio system. So, because you're right, I've invested heavily in my son's life, right? And one, because I love music. I played piano when I was younger, but nobody asks you to play the Great Concerto when you're at a party, right? But and two, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and rock music was everywhere, and I love the rock genre. Period. It's the whole element of all the musicianship that has to be put together, and as well as lyrics and melody, and then of course the production process. It's a lot of work just to get to that point. But then the work only begins when you finally release a song.
Yes, exactly. And you're on tour, and you're like, okay, what are the guys doing in the back of the bus right now? I'm driving about, I don't know, somewhere between 6 and like 18-hour days, literally. And when you get to the stop, the diesel stop, are they pouring off to feed their faces and check their cell phones and, hit the bio brake? Or are they actually there to check your mirrors and your tires and your oil and everything else as part of that tour experience de force? That's the work to me. It's not even, and by the way, that's just the work on the tour part. Right. Probably 80% of the work's even before the tour ever happened, because you're shelling out emails and phone calls left and right to get the tour to begin with, right?
Exactly. Yeah, so, one of the things you've been very successful at too, I think, is sort of what you're doing on obviously the music side and as well as obviously video, but you've also focused on your social media. Interestingly, your Twitter feed is pretty large. That's kind of cool because Twitter is sort of becoming a hot new vehicle for communication. What have you done differently to sort of make sure that your social media is working for you?
Well, that's a fair question, and I'll be honest. Like, it started as the former antecedent band before Sonic Octane. I was out there on an iPad, and I used to fly a lot between Colorado, where I currently live, and my former house in Pennsylvania. So as part of that whole deal, I was bored at airports because I was like, workaholic. So I'd get all my work done before I ever even got into a limo to go to the airport, let's say. And so what I would do is I would take the iPad, and I had a little Twitter account, and I think I had maybe a few hundred followers at the time. And I started just literally following, and I know this sounds very old school, but I'll explain how I scaled it too, is I would just follow every single artist, every single record label, every single radio station, every single, just name it, distribution company that I could possibly find. And I started with all the obvious ones like Eddie Van Halen and Eddie Money and, Yes, the band and all these different, artists. And then I went to their labels, and then I went to, well, how do they get their content distributed? And before you knew it, I was following maybe at that point several thousand. And then I started having more of those dudes slowly follow me. And then the next level I said, because that was kind of killing me, like, to be honest, to go one to one like that, I think I spent a period of approximately 2 to 3 years building it that way.
Right.
And then eventually I said, well, is there some way to automate some of this? Like, there's just got to be a better way. And so I tripped over and found this company called Hootsuite. And Hootsuite had APIs that you could drop content into Hootsuite as a post.
Right, right.
And then you could hashtag it, although it wasn't a lot of platform specific hashtagging. At least it was hashtagging. And you could drop video, you could drop photo posts, or just text posts into their platform. And lo and behold, instead of posting separately on Twitter and Facebook, you're now posting across those platforms in a single post. And at that point, I built several accounts. And all of a sudden, bands like, believe it or not, the band Yes, Eddie Money, Entertainment Tonight, Reverb, the online music equipment retailer, all these companies started not only following us, a few of them started engaging with us. It was hilarious because we're this little band. And there's one guy behind the curtain, me, burning the midnight oil when I really didn't have the time to do that. And that's how this thing scaled over time. And that's why we have, 21,000 followers on Twitter today. Right. We've got somewhere on magnitude 14,000 additional followers on LinkedIn and Facebook and other places combined.
Yeah, and I think I tell people all the time, I hate social media generally because it's sometimes a sewer. But for bands, it's really necessary. I think what's happened, however, is that a lot of social media, particularly Facebook and Instagram, when you post, you're actually driving people to them, not to you. I've noticed our engagement rates have come down. I don't know if you've seen that as well, because the algorithms towards pushing paid for promotion have begun to overtake what was formerly a lot of organic engagement. So I think that's why, frankly, TikTok has been ascendant. They're pretty smart about the way they're managing the whole music side of their business, more so than Facebook ever was. So I think that's the other thing people have to keep an eye on is, what are you doing with social media? I think Twitter, is something people need to take another look at. I think Musk is going to be doing a lot of different things in that respect. And of course, I think, looking at some of the newer platforms, particularly, I think TikTok and TikTok Music now is going to be coming out. You're going to probably see some new streaming models. Been reading articles from the Universal Music Group CEO about how you have to move away from sort of this pure numbers of streams to actually engagement so that the artists are paid appropriately for their talent. Because a lot of people are buying streams. That's still happening extensively in the industry. So I think at the end of the day, the artists really just have to be prepared for the changes in the economic model generally that's going to be occurring over the next maybe couple, 3 years, because it is changing and it's changing rapidly.
Well, there's a cool thing when you're in two industries that you start seeing these weird, unexpected parallels, Mark. And I'll tell you what I really love about our interview here And I'm going to challenge, if I may respectfully say, because we're new friends here today, but I'm gonna put a challenge gauntlet in both of our futures together. So it turns out that and I'll explain the parallel, then I'll go into a specific gauntlet request here.
You bet.
So in tech, companies like Accenture make billions with a B as in boy dollars a year by leveraging their balance sheets to bring additional consulting power into their client communities. And by that, what I mean is they'll bring a bunch of consultants in. Yeah, I could charge you for the hours that these consultants are working with your business. When they leverage their balance sheet, however, they've got a certain amount of intellectual capability, intellectual property that they can leverage into those businesses that are clients, in addition to the labor, the people that they bring in as well. And this just had me thinking about something. And I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm going to throw it out there for fun and see if it resonates. So it's kind of like Sonic Octane has literally over $100,000 of actual film content that's amazing video content.
Mm-hmm.
And not a single one of this videos have been commercially released as yet, because I mentioned earlier, we're actively shopping for the platforms that will, in fact, step up to the table and broker a proper distribution deal.
Right.
So what I'm thinking about, Mark, is this. How would you like to be a power builder on your show? And we can circle back at some point to share this success story where we take this content. Now, this content was filmed at Mandalay Bay, right on top of the exclusive foundation room where J-Lo's got a 50,000 bottle of cognac sitting in a locker, for example. And we've got content out in the desert where the movie, the major motion picture Casino, was shot. We've got content at Tom Jones's mansion, so on and so on. And we just walk it in the door to some of these majors together. And much like Accenture does in the tech world to leverage their balance sheet, we can leverage our intellectual property, you as my, let's say, broker of choice.
Right.
And my deal maker, my rainmaker, if you will.
Yeah, there you go.
Me as the nerd that did all the sweat equity behind some of this stuff to share the stories, whatever that was. And we just broker a deal, because what we can tell them is this. And this is the beautiful thing about Hollywood. You know, it's so unionized and the fixed costs are like so crazy out there. To film this content in Hollywood would run about $1 million in production costs. So we can walk into Netflix today, Mark, literally you and I. We send a quick letter over. I know how to send a letter corporate wise like you would. And we could easily get these meetings teed up inside of a month or two. And just tell them this, for zero cost of production and acquisition, we give you indefeasible, non-exclusive rights of use of this content to put in rotation, to market, et cetera, and promote. We'll charge you absolutely zero to acquire this. Well, we might charge them $1 just to have an actual technical.
Right. That's right.
And
Consideration.
Yeah, exactly. Now we're leveraging the balance sheet of Sonic Octane and the joint venture you and I would create as part of that, because you would be an actual physical officer of what would be a distribution deal.
Sure.
And basically, we charge them nothing to acquire it, and they just pay us royalty on the back end.
Exactly. I mean, that's a beautiful model. I'd love to engage in that. Let's take that offline and figure out how to do that. I'm happy.
Dude, I think that would be awesome. Because that busts open doors for other artists under your label, by the way.
Yep.
And that gives you access to all this content, which I can't even wait to share more of it with you.
Yeah, I really want to see that. And by the way, one of the cool thing we're doing, just as a side note, in September, we're actually putting on an independent music festival here in Hendersonville, Tennessee. It's Iron Fest. So we've got 17 bands already booked for that. It's a 1 day. Next year it'll go to 2 days. But we're really trying to put everything together here shortly. And, you know, really, again, all this is to leverage and enhance the label, enhance the brand, and, you know, frankly, begin to identify even, you know, more popular bands that could potentially work with us. So it's a lot of fun.
I think
This could be very cool. I mean, obviously, you know, I mean, as you rightly point out, I mean, even what I know what Musk is trying to do, because he's looking at production in Twitter. I mean, he's looking at, you probably read over the weekend, he's talking about doing a special venture with Tucker Carlson, right? I mean,
Yep.
the whole dynamic of media is changing, right, daily. I mean, it's amazing to me. And you know, I was reading another article. CBS and a few of the majors, ABC and NBC, are all cutting characters out from the sitcoms, right? They're only keeping the main characters and letting the other ones go and use as needed, pay them as needed, because the cost of production is too high now. So,
Correct.
you know, I think the opportunity right now to take something like you've done and push it into the channel may be realistic.
You know, it's really all about, and I've heard of other deals, and being very candid with you and your audience, Mark, to be completely transparent. I've befriended someone who's been in the film industry a long time, and he's super accomplished in my view. And what he's done is he's gone to, well, I won't mention the name of the company just to protect his interest, but it's a major streaming company, and their logos are black and red. And what I could say is they have this like deal that basically forwards a few $100,000. It's like not even a rounding error to this company. And the few $100,000 he turns around and he flips it towards the cost of production for his audio and his video. And he flips it back to that same distributor for what they hope will gross about $1 million in total revenue over their platform when they go to drop the content in and distribute and market and put it in the rotating touts and so on. And after it hits $1 million, guess what? Then they get to participate in additional earnings. And I'm thinking to myself, my content, I know what it costs me, and I can, you know, very easily document that.
Right.
Not $100,000. And at the end of the day, I know in Hollywood, content like this, when you're bringing a film crew of 18 people and support staff out into the desert in 105-degree heat on a full day on a Friday, it happened to be, in the middle of Las Vegas, and you're filming shots with 4 separate cameras spinning, that's $1 million video.
That's right.
There,
just one time. That's correct. Yep.
So I know what we've got. I know that kind of sort of pretty well. I think it'd be a lot more interesting to a major distribution platform with indefeasible, non-exclusive rights, because we can multiply that earning across every platform and say, hey, if you want to spend, a couple $100,000 to do an amateur video, and then you're going to have to hope that you break even and make a little more for that same participant in that deal on the back end, we'll just give it to you for $1, because we're very confident this is going to make everyone a whole lot of fun. You know what I mean?
That's right.
Lot of
That's right. Exactly.
So,
well, I'll take that offline and we'll figure this out. I'd love to engage with you on that. I want to see the stuff as well. Obviously, I'd love to see the video.
I'll send it to you today in the full unedited, ready for distribution versions for sure.
Cool. Obviously, I've got good relationships at the CEO level of a few of these tech companies I've been working with on the music side. And in fact, I have some ideas already popping around in my mind. So let's figure out how we do this.
Let's make it happen.
I promise not to take any more than 80%. Okay. I mean, I'm generous. I think,
you'd be surprised to know. I'm at the point in life where I tell myself, as long as I've got diesel for that bus and my band's happy and they're not like worried about eating, and I'm not worried about coming home and looking at my wife going, I didn't earn anything.
I hear you.
Good. I'm okay, man. I'm okay.
Very cool. So, look, as we sort of wrap it up here, this has been a really wonderful conversation. I think a couple of takeaways I want to share for the audience to summarize. I think what's critical for everybody to understand is, music sort of inspires people from the very beginning. It's in your soul. I think that sort of defines who you were early on in your life, and to go back and do a corporate career and then decide to come back into it is very feasible, and the opportunities exist. But you have to be willing to take the risks, I should say, and to do the work. And in doing so, you can make a living at this. There is investment required, whether that's your time and you monetize that time, or whether it's physical cash that you're putting into your brand, into your business, which is your music business generally. You have to be willing to do that. And in addition, it's not just, as I've told people numerous times, it's not just about get it produced and release it. It's about all the subsequent downstream activity. And I think a lot of artists don't appreciate that as they sort of move forward. They really enjoy the what I'll call rock style life or the performance life. But the reality is, if you really want to be successful, you have to figure out how to develop channels for your music, channels for your merchandise, channels for your brand, and ultimately how you meet the kind of people that can help you be successful. In the end, I joked earlier that you were an overnight sensation of over 20 some years. Yes, nobody's an overnight sensation anymore. The reality is it takes work, it takes effort, it takes time. But if you work at it and if you are considered serious about your craft, you can be successful in this business. And I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed talking with you. And we'll see whether you and I can do a little more business together.
Mark, I'm very confident we can find it and we can win and we can bring it back to your audience to share with them that insight. Because you know what? I truly believe in the mission of exactly what you're doing here. It's so important for artists. And I'll be humble and trip through all the learnings in these interviews, because I'll tell you what, driving a tour bus to New York and back and learning how to sell equipment to subsidize the cost of that, I'd never want another one of your artists to go through a situation like that. They should know the economics on the front end of their tours going into it. And they should also understand that when they go to broker the deal, that the deal counts more than they may even know. And that social media post that they do a couple times a day while they're on tour means the world to their label that are there breaking their backs to support them. So yes, I will continue to share that message. I feel very passionately about all that you're doing for your artists, and God bless you and thank you for it.
Robbie, thanks so very much, and I appreciate you being with us today. This is Mark Skoda with Robbie Zeas, and you've been listening to The Independent Musician. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks for joining us this week on The Independent Musician. Make sure to visit our website, IronGateRecordsRadio.com, where you can subscribe to the show on your favorite streaming platform so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in this podcast, we'd appreciate you giving us feedback or simply tell a friend about the show. Be sure to tune in next week for a new episode of The Independent Musician, where the independent musician is the star.